up from the south where the Spanish held the land before Ashley ever dreamed of sending men. I was trapping the Green River in the Wasatch Mountains before the Americans knew where to begin. My father spoke French on the banks of the St. Lawrence. I carried that tongue to the Rockies out west. The man of the mountains, the man of the mountains. The mountains don't care what flag's on your chest. The man of the mountain. Before your maps were drawn, I knew every pass. The man of the mountain. The rivers remember me, the peaks and the grass. I trapped the Green River, I crossed the Great Basin. I shook hands with nations no American knew. The man of the mountain, half French and half wild and completely true. The Shoshone called me friend before the trappers arrived. I traded fair and I learned every tongue. I knew the Salt Lake before Bridge or ever saw it. I had been and gone while these Americans were young. When Ashley's men finally came pouring over South Pass, they found my fires already burning out west. The man of the mountains had been there before them. The French-Canadian mountain man, they'd never contest. The man of the mountain. Before your maps were drawn, I knew every pass. The man of the mountain. The rivers remember me, the peaks and the grass. I trapped the Green River, I crossed the Great Basin. I shook hands with nations no American knew. The man of the mountains, half French and half wild and completely true. On the Provost River, the Ute warriors found me, cut down half my party in a single bad day. I lost good men on that river in Utah, but I rose and I rode and I didn't stay. The river still carries my name through the valley, carved into the land by the life that I led. The Americans came and they took all the credit, but the French were already here. Enough said. I rode to the Rendezvous every summer, drank with the Anglos and traded my blues. I told my stories in French and in Spanish, and the mountains translated to whatever you choose. When the beaver ran out and the young men went homeward, I stayed in the country that I'd always known. The man of the mountains, the man of the mountains, the last of a kind and content to be alone. The man of the mountains. Before your maps were drawn, I knew every pass. The man of the mountains. The rivers remember me, the peaks and the grass. I trapped the Green River, I crossed the Great Basin. I shook hands with nations no American knew. The man of the mountains, half French and half wild and completely true. Along the Green River, horses and smoke, 1,000 men pouring in from the high lonesome trail. Crow and Shoshone and Nez Perce riding, French-Canadian trappers with beaver for sale. Ashley's men coming in from the mountains, burned brown and lean from a year in the wild. The whiskey comes out and the fiddle starts singing, and the Rocky Mountain fur trade runs loose for a while. Green River, rendezvous, come on and gather. Every trapper and trader and warrior and chief. Green River, rendezvous, 1 month to live in, before the mountains take you back and the winter sets in. Dance till your boots wear through, from St. Louis, trade goods and powder and ribbon and blade glasses. Here with his scars like a map of the mountains, Jet Smith reads his Bible in the noise in the shade. Young Kit Carson just rode in from town, barely a man but already a name, and Bridges telling stories that nobody believes, but every last one of them is true all the same. Green River, rendezvous, come on and gather. Every trapper and trader and warrior and chief. Green River, rendezvous, 1 month of living. Before the mountains take you back and the winter sets in. Dance till your boots wet through. Drink till the stars spin. Tell your stories tall and true on the Green River rendezvous. The Shoshone women trade beads and good horses. The Crow count their blues by the light of the fire. The beaver are plenty and the prices are holding, and nobody yet knows that the market will expire. For 1 month a year this valley is a sinner, on from the wilderness, gone with the fall. The loneliest man in the loneliest country come together right here, and they give it their all. The races are on and the debts are all settled. The powder and tracks and the blankets change hands. A man trades a season of cold and of danger for enough to go back to the high mountain land. The Frenchmen are singing, the fiddles are sawing, the fire burns high on the Green River bank, and every man here knows that come August morning he rides back alone in the country, dark and blank. Green River, rendezvous, come on and gather. Every trapper and trader and warrior and chief. Green River, rendezvous, 1 month of living. Before the mountains take you back and the winter sets in. Way through, drink till the stars spin. Tell your stories tall and true on the Green River rendezvous. Oh, Green River rendezvous. While the trappers were dreaming of beaver and glory, Sublet was counting the cost of it all. Powder and blankets and steel traps and horses, the price of a season before the first snowfall. He rode out of St. Louis with wagons behind him, first man to prove that the wagons could cross over South Pass and down to the Green River Valley, and he knew to the penny his profit and loss. Sublet built the road that the legends walked on. Sublet kept the rendezvous alive. Every free trapper who ever went under knew whose wagon train helped him survive. Not the boldest name, not the tallest story, but the Rocky Mountain fur trade ran on his back. Sublet, the man who built the machine and kept every last trapper on track.
He founded the Rocky Mountain Fur Company with Fitzpatrick and Bridger and Jackson beside. He undersold the competition till they folded and controlled every river from both banks and wide. He knew that the beaver wouldn't last forever. He watched the prices and read every sign, but he kept on hauling those wagons to the mountains till the last of the Rendezvous ran out of time. Sublet built the road that the legends walked on. Sublet kept the Rendezvous alive. Every free trapper who ever went under knew his wagon train helped him survive. Not the boldest name, not the tallest story, but the Rocky Mountain fur trade ran on his back. Sublet, the man who built the machine and kept every last trapper on track. The heroes get the songs and the mountains get the glory. The men who kept the books get the silence and the dust. But nothing moves across a continent on courage alone. You need someone who knows who to pay and who to trust. He shook hands with the Shoshone, bargained with the Crow. He hauled his wagons over passes no one thought a wheel could clear. And when the fur trade finally died and the legends rode away, Sublet had already seen it coming for a year. He sold his shares before the bottom fell completely, got out while the getting was still worth a dime. Some called it luck, but luck is just good preparation, and Sublet had been reading every sign. The wagons that he drove to prove the pass was open became the Oregon Trail before the decade turned. The road that carried half a nation to the Pacific was built on every lesson William Sublet learned. Sublet built the road that the legends walked on. Sublet kept the Rendezvous alive. Every free trapper who ever went under knew whose wagon train helped him survive. Not the boldest name, not the tallest story, but the Rocky Mountain fur trade ran on his back. Sublet, the man who built the machine, the unsung hand that kept it all on track.
I was born in Virginia bondage, slave born on the wrong side of the line. My father was a white man with land and ambitions. My mother was a woman they said didn't matter at all in their time. But the West doesn't ask you what you were born to. And Ashley needed men who could fight and could ride. So I rode out of St. Louis with nothing but my rifle, and I never looked back at the life I left behind. I made myself on the back of these mountains. I chose my own nation when no nation chose me. Born into chains, but I ride as a war chief. The Crow gave me something no wide world could see. Call me Jim Beckwourth, mountain man and warrior. Call me the morning star, that's what the Crow called me. I made myself on the back of these mountains, and no man alive put a chain back on me. I trapped the Yellowstone and the Bighorn and the Platte. I fought the Blackfoot in a dozen different passes in the snow. The white trappers told their stories over whiskey at the Rendezvous, but none of them rode where they watched me ride. The Crow watched me fight, and the Crow made their decision. They said this man belongs to us, his medicine runs strong. They painted me a warrior, and they gave me a new name, and I wore that name like I've been wearing it all along. I made myself on the back of these mountains. I chose my own nation when no nation chose me. Born in the chains, but I ride as a war chief. The Crow gave me something no white world could see. Call me Jim Beckwourth, mountain man and a warrior. Call me the morning star, that's what the Crow called me. I made myself on the back of these mountains, and no man alive put a chain back on me. I led the Crow warriors into the Blackfoot country. I planned the raids and I rode at the front of the line. The white world had opinions about who could lead an army, but the Crow never once asked me what the white world opined. I married into the nation, then I buried my dead beside them. I spoke their tongue as clean as any man born to the ground. I was war chief on the Powder River, war chief on the Big Horn. Feared across the plains and still alone at night. I told my own story and I told it tall and louder, because the man who tells the story is the man who gets to live. I live between two worlds and I belong to neither fully. The Crow called me their own, but I knew what I was. The white trappers bought me a drink at the Rendezvous and wondered whether a man like me was everything he said he was. But I earned every legend that I hung upon my shoulders, out where the mountains don't care what a man's supposed to give. I made myself on the back of these mountains. I chose my own nation when no nation chose me. Born in the chains, but I died as a war chief. The Crow gave me something no white world could see. Call me Jim Beckwourth, mountain man and warrior. Call me the morning star, that's what the Crow called me. I made myself on the back of these mountains, and I rode those mountains wild, and I rode them free. October 1833, and the Sierra rose before them, a wall of granite pushing into a sky turned white. Walker looked at the range, and he looked at his men behind him, and he turned his horse west, and he rode into the height. No map existed for the country they were entering. No man who had crossed it had come back to say the way. Just 40 men on horses in a wilderness of snowfields, trading everything they knew for the end of the next day. West beyond the mountains, where the water runs to the other side. West beyond the mountains, where no American boot had left a mark to find. The cold came in like a country of its own making. The horses went down and the men went lean and gray. West beyond the mountains, Walker never said a word, and he never stopped the way. They ate what the horses couldn't carry any further. They wrapped their hands in hide, and they kept the rifles clean. The altitude took men at the edges of the column, the kind of cold that settles in the places in between. 8 days in the high country before the first descent. 8 days of granite silence and the wind across the stone. A man stopped talking somewhere in the second week of crossing, not from despair but from a country too large for words alone. West beyond the mountains, where the water runs to the other side. West beyond the mountains, where no American boot had left a mark to find. The cold came in like a country of its own making. The horses went down and the men went lean and gray. West beyond the mountains, Walker never said a word, and he never stopped the way. Then the valley opened under them without a warning. The granite walls dropped away and the world fell wide. A valley so enormous that the men pulled up their horses and stood there in the stirrups, and nobody cried. Waterfalls coming off the cliffs like white rivers of nothing. Half a mile of open air between the water and the ground. The horses stood still in the thin light of that morning, and 40 mountain men made not a single sound. Walker wrote it down in plain words in his journal. Nothing poetic, nothing more than what he saw. Just the bearing and the distance and the depth of the valley, the way a practical man records an act of God. The Miwok people had been living in that valley since the time no trapper's calendar could reach. Walker noted their existence, turned his horse toward the Pacific, and left Yosemite to the silence and the beach. West beyond the mountains, where the water runs the other way to sea. West beyond the mountains, where the walls of granite held a world no white man seen. The road that Walker opened would fill up behind him, with the weight of every wagon rolling west, west beyond the mountains. The mountains let them through and close behind the rest. Draw the Yellowstone from memory by firelight. The other men are laughing at the edge of what I hear. I put the bighorn where I know the bighorn has to be, and mark the paths we crossed last autumn going into the new year. I have been 5 years in this country, keeping records. Every river that I name because it's true. And I know that when this map leaves these mountains, someone else will use it as a road to ride right through. I am drawing a world that I am living in. Every line on paper is a door for someone else. I am writing down the wilderness I love, and I cannot stop my hand, and I cannot help myself. The mountains are still here, the passes are still open, the beaver in the rivers and the wide and nameless sky. But I can see what's coming in the lines I'm drawing. I have the cartographer's eye. The other trappers laugh when I pull out my journal. They say a man who writes things down is half a man at best. But every canyon that I've ridden, I have measured, and every peak I've named will stand long after all the rest. I was born to see the shape of what surrounds me, born to hold the whole of what I've traveled in my mind. And I love this country more than I can put on paper, which is why I cannot stop until the last line's left behind. I am drawing a world that I am living in. Every line on paper is a door for someone else. I am writing down the wilderness I love, and I cannot stop my hand, and I cannot help myself. The mountains are still here, the passes are still open, the beaver in the rivers and the wide and nameless sky. But I can see what's coming in the lines I'm drawing. I have the cartographer's eye. By the fire last night I finished the Great Basin, drew the Salt Lake where I know the Salt Lake lies, named the rivers for the men who helped me find them, and wondered if those men will recognize that the map I'm making is an invitation, that every blank I fill invites another kind of man. Settlers reading paper
where we read the mountains, following my lines to land. I drew by hand, and I love it here. I love the cold and I love the stone. I love the rivers running free and nameless. I love the country best when it's unknown. But a man who sees must say what he is seeing, even when the saying is the ending of the thing. So I draw it down by firelight while they're laughing, and I wonder what the morning's gonna bring. I am drawing a world that I am living in. Every line on paper is a door for someone else. I am writing down the wilderness I love, and I cannot stop my hand, and I cannot help myself. The mountains will be here when I am long forgotten. The river's running cold beneath a different kind of sky. I gave the West its first true map, and then I left it to the ones who couldn't draw but still arrived. I had the cartographer's eye. I draw the Yellowstone from memory by firelight. The other men are laughing.
I seen a glass mountain out past the Yellowstone country. I seen a creek that splits and runs to both the oceans at once. They laugh at me here by the fire with their whiskey, but I was standing right there and I know what I'd done. I built my fort where the Green River Trail crosses, where every wagon heading west has got to stop and resupply. Old Gabe is open for business in the mountains, and if you don't believe my stories, well, you don't have to try. Laugh if you want, I was standing right there when it happened. Laugh if you want, I can show you the creek where it splits. Every story I told you sounds like something impossible, but I've been to impossible and I know how it sits. I am the last of the mountain men standing. I am the hinge where the old world meets the new. Laugh if you want at old Jim Bridger's yarns. Every last one of them is true. The immigrants come through now, thick as summer rivers, pulling their wagons and their milk cows and their dreams out west. They look at me sideways like a relic from a tall tale, like a man who stayed too long past the end of the rest. I tell them Two Ocean Pass is just 3 days north of here, where you can stand and watch the water make its choice. They write it in their journals as an old trapper's nonsense, but the mountain's been saying it longer than my voice. The saints came through and said this country was theirs. I built my fort on ground I'd walked for 30 years of living. Young decided he would pay my work with bills. They burned it down before I could get back to save it. Said they needed nothing I could offer anymore. But I was here before, and I'll be here come morning. Just a man and his mountains, and another open door. Laugh if you want, I was standing right there when it happened. Oh, laugh if you want, I can show you the creek where it splits. Every story I told you sounds like something impossible, but I've been to impossible and I know how it sits. I am the last of the mountain men standing. I am the hinge where the old world meets the new. Laugh if you want at old Jim Bridger's yarns. Every last one of them is true. Every last one of them is true. Down the supply train out of St. Louis. Beaver's down to nothing, the market's gone flat. Some man in a London shop stopped buying felt and put the whole Rocky Mountain trade in his hat. Silk is what they're wearing now on the streets over there. We bled out half a generation in these mountains, and it ended with a tailor changing what's in fashion. You can't shoot a silk hat, you can't trap it in a river, you can't pray it back to beaver felt or make the market change. We crossed the Sierra and we froze on the Yellowstone. We fought the Blackfoot and we buried half our names. And somewhere in a London ballroom, someone tipped a silk hat to a lady and walked away. That's all. That's all it took. That's all. Sublet's wagon came in light that final summer. Half the usual powder, half the traps, half the lead. The prices on the blues wouldn't cover the mule feed, and the writing was on every wall we'd learned to read. Bridger laughed first because it sounded impossible. Glass would have laughed too if glass were still around. But the laughing stopped about the time the math caught up, and a season's worth of beaver didn't cover the ground. We could read a river in the dark by sound alone. We could navigate by stars across 1,000 miles of snow. We could find the pass that broke the Rocky Mountain wall, but we couldn't find a market that would pay us what we know. They're wearing silk in London, they're wearing silk in Paris, they're wearing silk in Boston and New York. And the beaver in the rivers just keep swimming, and nobody in the world wants what they wear. You can't shoot a silk hat, you can't trap it in a river, You can't pray it back to Beaverfeld or make the market change. We crossed the Sierra and we froze on the Yellowstone. We fought the Blackfoot and we buried half our names. And somewhere in a London ballroom, someone tipped a silk hat to a lady and walked away. That's all. That's all it took. That's all.
Green River, July 1840. The fires are burning, a crow ride in from the hills. Sublet's wagons are lighter than any year before them, but the whiskey is flowing and the fiddle never stills. Old enemies drinking together like old friends do. Men who haven't spoken since the last time standing here. The blues are stacked lower, but nobody mentions it. Just another Green River summer, just another year. One more year on the Green River, one more night beneath the wide Wyoming sky, one more round of stories by the fire, one more summer before we say goodbye. The fiddles are playing and the whiskey's going around, and nobody's saying what everybody knows. One more year on the Green River, one more rendezvous before the whole thing goes. A party of immigrants came through the valley yesterday, headed west on wagons with the children and their faith. They looked at the trappers like men from another century, like something disappearing that they couldn't quite place. Bridger guided some of them as far as the divide, said the pass was easy, said the water would be fine. Then he rode back down to the Green River fires, and nobody asked him what he saw on the other side. Ain't enough beaver left to justify the coming back. Half these faces here won't make the ride next year. Some are heading Oregon, some are hiring out as guides, some are just heading somewhere till the somewhere becomes clear. We didn't lose to armies and we didn't lose to winter. We just woke up one morning and the world had moved along. Sit down here beside me, let the fiddle play a little longer. It was a good run, friend. It was a hell of a long song. One more year on the Green River, one more night beneath the wide Wyoming sky, one more round of stories by the fire. The fiddles are playing, but the dancing's slowing down. One more year on the Green River, then we ride
call me old Gabe now. They say I'm a legend. They want me to tell them how the mountains were made. I tell them about Two Ocean Pass and the Glass Mountain, and they laugh the same way that they've always laughed. But at night when the story stops working on me, and the fire burns down to the coal and the dark, I still see the Grand River bottom in August, and a man breathing slow with the blood on his back. I left a man dying on the Grand River bottom. I told myself once that no man could survive. 50 years of mountains couldn't bury what I left there. Hugh Glass in the river, still breathing alive. They call me the legend, they call me old Gabe now. They say I'm the last of a kind that is gone, but the boy on the Grand River bottom is still there, still picking his rifle up and walking along. I guided the armies and I scouted for Fremont. I built my fort where the wagon roads crossed. I told every story the mountains ever gave me, and I counted every man that the mountains ever cost. Glass found me and he looked at me and said nothing, just studied my face like he needed to know. He said, boy, you're too young to carry what you left me. Then he walked back out in the rain and the cold. I've lived so long, the young ones think I'm lying about everything, the beaver, the Blackfoot, the snow, about the world before the wagons and the settlers, about the country that only the mountain men know. I am not lying, I was there, every last impossible word of it was real. And the one thing I never put into a story is the one thing that time has never let me heal. I left a man dying on the Grand River bottom. I was 17 years old and I walked away. 50 years of legend couldn't change what I know about it. Hugh Glass forgave me, that was the hardest day. They'll bury me out here beneath the white sky, the last of the mountain men going to ground. Old Gabe is finally quiet in the mountains, and the Grand River keeps making its sound. 16 years old. Hired on with the trappers before he had his name. By the time the Rendezvous knew what it was looking at, Kid Carson was already more than what he came. He trapped the Bayou Salade in the Yellowstone and Platte. He rode with Bridger, rode with Fitzpatrick and the rest. And every man who rode beside him said the same thing: that boy moves through this country like he built it going west. By the time they wrote the story, he was somewhere else already. By the time the papers printed it, he crossed another range. The dime novels made him 10 feet tall in eastern parlors, while the real man slept beneath the stars and didn't change. Kid Carson, every western trail eventually finds him. Kid Carson, the maps just followed where he'd been. By the time they made him legend, he was already farther west, already riding into country no one's seen. When Fremont needed someone for the Sierra crossing, he asked for Carson and the answer came back yes. 3 expeditions through the spine of the continent, 3 times Fremont's glory ran on Carson's compass west. He took them through the passes Walker opened, through the canyons Bridger knew by feel and sound. And Fremont wrote the glory in his journals, while Carson broke the trail and didn't write a word down. They printed stories back in Boston about a man he wasn't, a giant of the frontier, 10 feet tall and made of steel. He read one once and laughed and saddled up by morning. The legend couldn't ride and Carson could. By the time they wrote the story, he was somewhere else already. By the time the papers printed it, he crossed another range. The dime novels made him 10 feet tall in eastern parlors, while the real man slept beneath the stars and never changed. Kid Carson, every western trail eventually finds him. Kid Carson, the maps just followed where he'd been. He became a frontier legend while the frontier still needed him. And he kept on riding west. And he kept on riding west. And he kept on riding west. I loaded my possibles into a wagon, traded my pack mules for something that rose. Doc Newell said, well, Joe, I guess this is the future. I said, I guess it is, and we started down the road. The immigrants lined up behind us like a river, families and bonnets and children asking why. I know every crossing between here and the Columbia, and none of them will ever know my name or try. This is the Oregon Road, rolling west on the trail that we bled to open. This is the Oregon Road, built on 30 years of rivers crossed and frozen. The wagons follow where the trappers walked before them. The settlers see the road, but not the cost. This is the Oregon Road, and the men who made it are already lost. A boy of maybe 10 came up beside my stirrup, said, "Mister, have you been out west before?" I told him once or twice and kept my eyes on the mountains. He wouldn't understand what once or twice was worth. I recognized the sweet water where Jed Smith found the passage. I recognized the wind, the rivers cold and gray. The country hasn't changed, just the people moving through it. Same road, different reasons, different day. We opened every door that they are walking through now. We named every river that they're crossing on this road. They'll build their towns on ground we trapped in winter, and never lose a night of sleep for what that cost us. This is the Oregon Road, rolling west on the trail that we bled to open. This is the Oregon Road, built on 30 years of rivers crossed and frozen. The wagons keep on coming like a tide behind us. Doc Newell just laughed and flicked the reins. This is the Oregon Road, and we ride it to the end of what remains. Passes are still open in the early autumn cold. The rivers run the same as when the trappers named them. The granite peaks don't carry any memory of the men who crossed them and were swallowed and were claimed by them. No marker stands at Three Forks, no stone above the Grand River. The mountains keep no record, they only keep the silence and the cold and the gray. Ghost of the high lonesome, riding where the old trails used to go. Ghost of the high lonesome, the mountains hold the names that no one upon the ridges, the same wind through the same passes blowing free. Ghost of the high lonesome, the wilderness was here before us, and it's all that it was always going to be. The rendezvous ground on the green river is empty. The wagon ruts are filling in with grass and stone. The fiddles and the whiskey and the warriors and the trappers, all of it dissolving back to silence and to bone. Coulter walked through Yellowstone alone and unremarked. Smith knelt in the Cimarron dust and finished his prayer. And the mountains that received them kept on being mountains long after every last one of them stopped being there. They were the first Americans the West had ever seen, before the settlers, before the soldiers, before the maps were drawn. They gave the continent its shape in the years before the shaping, and the wilderness closed over them and carried on. Ghost of the high lonesome, riding where the old trails used to go. Ghost of the high lonesome, the mountains hold the names that no one knows. Coulter and Glass and Jed Smith, Bridger and Beckwourth and Walker and the rest. Ghost of the high lonesome, they rode into the wilderness, and the wilderness was all of it, was always all there was.